Please welcome Amanda Ripley.
Thank you very much. It is great to see all of you here and great to be here with some of the top business leaders in the United States. And great to get out of Washington, D.C., I should add, and go to a place that seems to be functioning a little better. So I want to welcome here today our panelists. We have Rex Tillerson, who is the chairman and CEO of ExxonMobil. We have Jorge Benitez, who is Accenture's chief executive of the United States and managing director of North America. After that, we have Joe Tucci, who is the chairman and CEO of EMC Corporation. And we have Frederick Humphries, Jr., who is the vice president of U.S. Government Affairs for Microsoft. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Let's take a seat. We're going to talk here today about the business case for raising standards for what kids should know in the United States. I recently had the chance to go to Kentucky, which was the first state to adopt the Common Core State Standards, has been a real leader on this. And I was embarrassed to say that I had never been to Kentucky. So I figured this was my shot. So I went there for Time magazine, and I started interviewing teachers and students and parents. And I have to tell you, now they're 3 years in, so they're like old hands at this, but compared to most states. This is the only time I have ever interviewed multiple teachers from multiple very different kinds of schools, and they were all actually excited about an education reform. Obviously, there are some teachers who are not excited about the Common Core State Standards, but at least the teachers I met in Kentucky, after they'd gotten through the initial phase of pain and suffering, and there was an initial phase of pain and suffering, after they'd gotten through that, particularly if they had principals who gave them the time to plan for and prepare and sort of marinate in these standards, they really were excited about them. They seemed to feel like they finally had clear goals and a common language to talk about it. And even students, kids that I talked to, said that standardized tests were less grueling now because they weren't trying to cram a ridiculous amount of things in the last 3 weeks before the tests. And then I compare that with, I spent several years studying countries around the world and what kids are doing in these countries compared to kids in the US. And one of the things that really stays with me, and then I want to start this conversation, is that when I surveyed hundreds of exchange students who had spent time studying in public high schools in the United States. And 9 out of 10 of them said their US classes were easier. 9 out of 10, and 7 out of 10 American exchange students who had lived abroad agreed that their US classes were easier. So this was something that was really startling to me. You don't usually see that kind of consensus in a survey of kids, but they really did agree on this. And it looks, if you look at the data, it's pretty consistent at every age level and every socioeconomic level that we are particularly struggling in math and science. But it is true at every data set that I've seen. We got a very interesting new data set on adults last week, which many of you know about. And you saw the same thing where in numeracy in particular, American adults had only 2 countries out of 22 where the average score was lower than ours, and that was Italy and Spain. So I want to talk here today about how to connect the dots for people and what your views are, given your experience as business leaders, about why all this matters, which pieces of it matter the most, and how to communicate that to communities around the country. Now, Rex, you are a lifelong Texan, correct?
I am.
Okay, and now interestingly, I don't need to tell you that Texas is one of only a handful of states that did not adopt the Common Core State Standards. ExxonMobil has really pushed the Common Core, as you have personally, so this must be frustrating for you. And I wonder if, when you encounter folks and you talk about this in Texas or around the country, what are folks not getting about this? And have you found anything that does seem to break through the noise and help people understand why you are so passionate about this?
Well, it is terribly frustrating to me that my own home state has been unwilling to embrace the Common Core State Standards. And we did engage very heavily during the last legislative session because education reform was actually on the agenda, particularly around utilization of the STAR program, which is the Texas system of measuring student outcomes. And the issue, which I told them, is they were working on the wrong thing. They were having a debate over whether 15 tests is the right number, or 7 tests is the right number, or 5 tests is the right number. And I said, that's not the issue. The issue is you're not testing the right things because you don't have a set of standards. So we did engage pretty heavily. And I think what I encounter, there's two reasons why policy leaders in particular, and then educators, I would say secondarily, seem to have some concerns, reluctance, outright opposition to adoption of Common Core state standards. And one's quite simply because in places where the standard has been used to test student outcomes, not surprisingly, a state that was measuring their educational system against one set of standards was performing up here. They measured the next year against the Common Core, and it's down here. That's entirely to be expected. And in fact, that is the reason why these standards need to be adopted, because they are measuring our student progress against the performance of other states, but importantly, the performance of the rest of the world. And I know y'all have all talked about the statistics, and you mentioned some in terms of how we're doing when we measure ourselves against the rest of the world. So there is this reluctance because it in some sense reveals the deficiency in the program, and that's good. I mean, what we try to help people understand is we have to understand that. In business, we measure all kinds of things, and we oftentimes find things deteriorate, and that's how we know to go in and make some changes and to fix that and improve it. Well, it's no different in the education system. But the second reason we encounter opposition, reluctance, is political, ideological, and so much of the debate gets caught up in very broad political perspectives and ideological and philosophic perspectives and positions around the proper role of the 3 principal government areas that have influence and own or control the public education system: the federal government, state governments and their boards of education, and local boards of education. And we seem to be really caught up in who owns what in each of those 3 levels of government oversight, instead of being caught up on what are we responsible for doing, which is we're responsible for delivering students from an education system that meet the workforce needs of the country and the nation. And how should we be doing that? And so a lot of this reluctance is state level, resisting federal standards, resisting federal involvement, resisting federal incentive programs to adopt because of concerns over losing state control. And you can translate that down even in some cases at the local level: resistance to state standards, state curriculum, losing control. So regrettably, what's happened is the real issue of how do we improve the system? How are we going to get better outcomes? And we're convinced that you cannot achieve a better outcome if you're not measuring yourself against a high standard that you know others are measuring themselves against, so you can understand progress and gaps. And we're just really struggling to get people to accept that that's all in the world the Common Core state standards do. They provide you a standard. They do not dictate curriculum. They do not dictate how you have to teach. They do not dictate what you have to teach. They dictate this is what a student should know at this progression of their education through the public system. So we know, okay, we're doing well, we're not. And clearly there are some fantastic teaching models of success all over the country, pockets of excellence. Measuring it with a common standard is going to allow us to find those and identify those and replicate them and take them on a broad scale across the whole country. If we're all using a different standard, we don't know where any of us are.
So do you find, I saw you were interviewed, the other day by Tom Brokaw for NBC's Education Nation, and he asked you about this, and you seemed at one point to sort of suggest that maybe employers will have to prioritize hiring in states that do have the Common Core. Is that something that you feel like maybe employers should push harder on to really connect the dots for people about what this might mean for their future economic opportunities?
Well, I think here's the way I view it. I'm the customer of the system, and all of my colleagues here, we're the customers of the system. We're corporate executives, we run big businesses, but I'll say that more broadly for the business community at large. We're the customers of the education system. So obviously we believe we have the greatest stake in this. because our whole future business success depends upon the quality of the people that we can attract and bring into our organizations to be successful. So clearly, if I am trying to find the best talent, and this is really about talent, we've got a talent deficiency in the country today. Where am I going to find that talent, and what confidence can I have that talent is going to come to me equipped to do certain things so that I can then build on what they know and make them fit for my purpose with my own internal training? Well, I made the comment to Brokaw, and I'm serious about it, that if I'm looking for talent, why wouldn't I go to a states that are using the Common Core State Standard, where I know what the performance of that education system is, and not only do I know its performance relative to other states, but I also know its performance relative to international workforces, which I also am very interested in attracting as well, as opposed to a state that has their own well-intended, and it may be a good standard, but I'm not going to have the time or the means to judge whether that standard is equivalent. So yes, I'm going to defer to a standard that I know is being used more broadly, and I understand how it was developed. And so yes, I think in the end, work, labor, talent is fungible. It moves. I mean, everybody in this room has moved around in their careers. I certainly have. You're going to go get the talent where you find the most qualified talent pool to be, and I think the Common Core State Standard is certainly a place that employers can look to say, this is an educational system that produces things to a very high standard. And if it's performing well against that standard, you can be rest assured that you've got good talent to start with. Now, what you do with them after you get them, that's up to you.
Right. No, I mean, the measurement angle works with me, and I'm a huge nerd on measurement. Like, I love measuring things and looking at them and trying to make them better. And I wonder, though, education is such an emotional issue that whether it's going to work on the people who need to be persuaded at this point. I want to now move to Jorge and ask a little bit about your experience at Accenture, and also as someone who was born in Cuba and came to the United States at age 10, and I believe your mother was a teacher, is that right?
She was.
I wonder how your experience in business, but also in your upbringing and your immigrating here, has shaped your story and your perspective on education.
I'd be happy to share it. Thanks, Amanda. So I have a passion about this from two perspectives, a personal one that I'll share in a second, and also professionally. But on the personal level, I mean, my mom's a teacher, my grandmother's a teacher, my daughter's going to be a teacher, so I'm surrounded by teachers, right? And it has been a big part of my life, and I think it's been the reason, I think, that has sort of built a foundation of learning that has really allowed me to achieve some level of success in life. And I will tell you that my mom made that very clear to all of us, all three of her kids. I remember getting drilled at the dinner table on vocabulary words and mathematical tables and all kinds of things, like probably many of you who have had parents as teachers. So for me, it was a very early education that teaching was really important. And I will give you one statistic. I came to this country at the age of 10. This is 1969, and I was doing math in 5th grade in Cuba that I did not do till 10th grade here.
That's
right?
what I thought you were going to say.
Just to dramatize that, right?
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because, I mean, I'm not sure there's a lot of things we can learn necessarily from Cuba, right? But putting that aside. but I will tell you that in the context of being able to improve our math and really STEM skills altogether, that's clearly the case. As it relates to my professional passion about this, I mean, I echo Rex's comments, right? I mean, when you think about what Accenture does, we're 275,000 people globally, and we serve clients in over 120 different countries. We hire 50, 60,000 people a year, primarily on STEM-related degrees. We will screen through 2 million resumes, right? And we will hire several thousand people from campus this year alone here in the United States and Canada. So we're a big employer of talent, and the company with the best talent wins. In our space, if we don't have the best talent, then we're not going to be able to win. And so that's why I'm passionate about this, because in order for us to compete globally in the global economy, we've got to have the right talent.
Now, some people say that companies should be doing more, though, to actually train people. That, okay, you get what you get, but you have a huge, I mean, I know most of what I feel like I learned that I use every day, I learned from one of my first editors, right? I mean, you learn a lot on the job. Do you feel like US companies in general are doing enough to train people to make up for some of the gaps?
I think a lot of companies are doing a lot, right? I mean, certainly we are at Accenture, and I know that a number of other companies that I work with are doing the same. because we're having to make up for the shortage of skill sets by not having worker-ready people coming out of college. And so, I mean, at Accenture, we invest a lot. We invest over $850 million a year just on training and professional development for our people. So that's a big investment. But we also work with a number of other providers to figure out how we can kind of leverage that and get that talent base that we so clearly need. I do think other companies are doing the same thing. I mean, they're having to make up for that shortfall, and I think they're trying to figure out how they can create that capability because it's not apparent, it's not there, and that gap is getting wider, particularly when you get to STEM. Just to give you one fact, so the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I think, recently announced that there's a survey that from the year 2008, so just 5 years ago, till 2018, STEM degrees are going to be much more in favor for those kinds of professions, twice as much as anything else. So if we think we have a shortage now, wait until this really becomes an explosive issue in the years to come.
I'm glad you brought that up because I want to ask Joe about STEM as well. I was on the playground yesterday, true story. My 6-year-old goes to a DC public school, and I was talking to another parent, and she said, we were talking about all this, and she said, but how much math do our kids really need to know? This is, a highly educated, thoughtful woman, but I wonder, like, God, how many centuries are we going to keep having this conversation? Like, we never say, nobody has ever said to me, how much reading do our kids really need to know? Like, really? So it really struck me, and I guess I wonder, as someone who runs a company with, 60,000 employees all over the world, how much math do our kids need to know? So I can take it back and tell this woman.
Like Jorge, I'm a product. My mother was a math teacher, and so I had it injected into me from a young age. So I had no choice. If you look about some of the, just a step back and go back to some of the major trends and how this is going to affect the demands from business and how these trends impact it. I mean, if you look at what's happening out there. There's some major things from information technology, and if you think about information technology, it really is hard for the U.S. or any industrialized country to get significant productivity gains or innovation without the use of IT. Right? So take that as a good, and then say, okay, now what's happening that's hot in IT? Well, first of all, you go with mobility, right? There's 1.5 billion smartphones, which have tremendous capabilities in existence. Just the smartphones alone have wiped out the film industry, they've changed the camera industry, just to mention two, right? If you think about further than that, there'll be 3 billion over the next 10 years. But more impressive is this phenomenon that's being called, you might have heard it under the name industrial internet, the Internet of Things, which is where they're building sensors into every product imaginable. So over the next 10 years, you'll see 200 to 300 billion devices connected to the internet, as they put sensors in watches, as they put sensors in clothing, as they put sensors in engines, and almost everything you can imagine. So think of the opportunity that you hear about cloud computing and big data, the ability to, in real time, in this massive amount of information that's being created by the sensors, by the mobility, by social networking, this massive amount of data, how do I analyze that quickly in real time, and how do I change my business models based on that information? What's the opportunity there? How many jobs are being created there? And then you think about the advent of cloud computing, which we need to do this analytics at a very different cost point, because this is massive amount of information. Now, where are those jobs going to come from? So you see manufacturing coming back to the U.S., but you look at the modern plant, it's really run through robotics, automation, and different kinds of people. If you think about the change and the opportunity it's going to have in healthcare, the e-learning, which is now, I made the analogy before, since it's going into the World Series, if this was a baseball game, we're probably in the bottom of the first, right? And the opportunity for e-learning, computerized learning, to really change both the cost curve and the way students learn is just phenomenal. Now, if you look at all those opportunities, unfortunately, there are two skills you're going to need. You're going to have mathematical skills, STEM skills, and you're going to have communication skills. And that's where the jobs are going to be created. So, as Rex said, as Jorge said, I mean, we hire a lot of people, and those are the people we're going to need. People that have good communication skills and understand the basic skills around what we call STEM, that I call math-related skills.
So you're saying that both of you are saying that this demand is just going to get
That's what
greater and greater.
There's going to be growth in jobs there, and there'll be decline of jobs.
Right.
You know, it's not the haves and the have-nots. It's the prepared and the unprepared.
Well, but what's one of the enduring mysteries, I think, for me is why, in the US compared to other countries, skills are actually rewarded at a very high level, statistically speaking, and the lack of skills are punished at a pretty severe level. So there's a kind of a disconnect, right, between, I mean, you know, it's not actually that hard to learn JavaScript, I'm told this, and there's all these jobs, you know, that you can get pretty decent wages from a lot of these jobs. Why are people not connecting the dots? Do you have a theory about why in some countries you do see kids connecting the dots and really going for engineering and math and science jobs and tech jobs, and there seems to be a lag here in the United States?
I think it's first of all, not to disagree with you, but I think some of these STEM skills are harder. You got to work harder.
Some are, yes.
Right? So some is the easy way out. I also think teaching hasn't changed as much as it needs to change. You know, there's statistics I've read where only 43% of students coming out of high school are ready for engineering and only 30% for the natural sciences.
Yeah.
So if you're not ready and it's hard,
Yeah.
and people aren't afraid to work
not a
hard,
combo, yeah.
but if they think they'll fail or we're not being innovative enough in how we teach, then they'll do other things, and there's not going to be as many jobs for those other things.
Which sort of circles back to the point that you can raise standards for these things, but unless you're also improving teacher preparation, particularly in math and science, you know, how do you get there? I mean, I was just reading a great study by Bill Schmidt that came out last week that said that 60% of our middle school math teachers are coming from the bottom tier of teacher prep programs with regards to rigor in math, which is discouraging.
Yeah, I got to echo what Rex said. I mean, in business, we're constantly measuring, right? And it goes back to one of the oldest adage, back to Deming. You know, it's important to measure. You got to measure what's important, and that's constantly what we're doing in business. And some of the times we like what we get, the results we get, and sometimes we don't. But when we don't, we change them. And I think those same principles have to get instilled, and that's what the core curriculum is all about. I mean, we got to instill that throughout our education system from pre-K all the way up.
That's a good segue actually to Frederick and Microsoft. And you actually have a long history in politics before joining Microsoft. And I wonder if there are some lessons from that part of your life and your current job as well that you find coming into your head when you're having these conversations. I mean, is a lot of this a messaging problem, or are people just not really, I mean, I do think there's a lot of anxiety in the United States among parents and everyone about our economic competitiveness. So then why is it such a challenge to raise the bar for what kids should know?
I'm not sure it's a messaging problem. I think it's one where we need to educate. And as I think about it, if I could, you know, listening to the last two, Jorge and Joe, talk about their parents, well, when I think about it, my father was a university president, and he had his PhD in physical chemistry. And if you could just bear with me for a second. And I think about science, technology, engineering, and math. He came from a town called Apalachicola, Florida. Probably only Governor Bush knows where that is. And my grandmother was a domestic. His father died. My grandfather died at 9. Went to Florida A&M University. Then went on to get a PhD in physical chemistry at the University of Pittsburgh. First African American to do that. Growing up, I used to get a chemistry set every Christmas. I could tell you that was going to be under the tree. And every year I attempted to burn down the house. And then I, fast forward, chose to go to law school. But what we talked about was science, technology, engineering, and math, and the critical thinking skills that you get from that. Now, fast forward, as an ambassador advocate on Capitol Hill and through the states at Microsoft, when it comes to STEM, we look at the state of play. Right now, there's 122,000 jobs in the US open, unfilled. But you have to have computational skills. But we only produce 40,000 BS degrees in computer science. Well, everybody's talking about big data. When you think about big data, McKinsey report, 1.5 million jobs by 2020. Those require those computational skills. Those require the computer science aspect. You look at the schools, 42,000 schools in the US, only 2,100 offer advanced placement computer science. We're in Massachusetts. How many people took the AP computer science test? 234. 145 who were Caucasian, 54 Asian, 13 Hispanic, 8 African American. Now, Massachusetts State's known for education, kind of a leader. Those kind of stats are the same throughout the country. It's not just unique there. So when I think about that messaging and how I think about the politics, we got to get the facts. These, the future, and you take Massachusetts, 52% of the jobs require some type of computational skills, right? The future is science, technology, and engineering, math. I don't want to overstate it, and it's not just from an information technology perspective, right? It's required. You want to do Tesla, you're going to need some CS, right? You want to do something in healthcare, you're going to have to understand big data. You want to do something in finance, same aspect. These are skills. So the yesteryear, when my dad would talk about chemistry and physics, today it's computer science. Computer science, and what we need to have, one of the things that Microsoft embarked upon was a national talent strategy that we rolled out last year. And it was one element of it, which is a critical and key element of it, is Common Core. We must strive for not mediocrity, for excellence. We must have that common set of skills and outcomes. Because I'm here to tell you, competition is alive and well in the future of what you're looking for, what's in China, as far as the students and that aspect. But it's something we need to change. We need to look at having standards so that the kid in Texas or in Mississippi or in California has those same skills to be competitive. And as you were asking Rex the question, if Texas doesn't do it, you know what's going to happen? If you don't have those standards, don't worry. None of us are going to be recruiting there. We're going to go where the talent is. And particularly multinational companies. That's just, it is what it is.
And I'm glad you brought this up. I noticed in Kentucky that some of the teachers actually got excited about the Common Core because it meant they would no longer be dismissed as like, oh, it's Kentucky. Because they would be doing the same things that other states that get more respect were doing under the Common Core with the same language. And that was appealing to them so they could get out from behind this sort of unearned reputation as a place that nobody thinks of as a leader in education. Actually, in some ways they are. Rex, I want to talk about the global competition in as granular a way as we possibly can, which is hard to do. But I think you said something like 60% of your 79,000 employees are not Americans, right? So you have an interesting point of comparison there. And I think your industry does test entry-level job applicants in math and science. Is that right?
Yes, we do, and really at all levels. And on a lot of our conversation and what's important to us are the engineers, the scientists, the mathematicians, because we need that to be successful. But a lot of the people we're hiring are not engineers and scientists, even though we have 20,000. But a lot of our organization are technicians, process operators, people who are working in refining operations, they're mechanics, they're electricians. And if you look at the way people work today, and others have commented on it, you have got to have a level of proficiency in math and science simply to be an electrician. You've got to have a level of proficiency simply to be a diesel auto mechanic. And today, because of the sophistication of all of the elements of the world I work in, I suspect everyone else's, if you don't have that level of proficiency coming out of high school, you can't even get into the technology training schools to get those very good, high-paying jobs. And that's, we see that markedly here in the United States. Other countries have educational systems that do identify, and there are two-track systems, and many of you probably are very familiar with them. Germany has it, Australia has it, where they begin to prepare young people who are not planning to go to a four-year university. They're not going to be lawyers, they're not going to be doctors, they're not going to be engineers, but they know they have to have this proficiency. They're all going to have that same level of proficiency when they graduate. It's just the kind of things that they've been training themselves for. So today, I mean, the case is, yeah, I mean, if the mother says, well, why do my kids need to know math? They're not going to be an engineer. Well, they may not be an engineer, but what do they want to be? And there's almost nothing in this world today that you can be successful at that doesn't require some element, some level of understanding of math science, because those elements, and I think Fred used the term, or maybe Joe did, you've got to be able to process critical thinking. And one of the other OECD measures, you mentioned that we're 18 countries ahead of us in math. There are 14 countries ahead of us in adults' use of digital technology for critical thinking. We can't even use the devices that are available to us proficiently, or as proficiently as other countries. So clearly, you know, we've got some challenges in this country to prepare our workforce for the future and to try and address that portion of the workforce that's stranded. Because today, you know, Fred mentioned the 100 and 200 and something, 70,000 jobs in computer science. There are 3 million jobs today in this country, 3 million. Even with the unemployment rate we have, 3 million that are unfilled. And they're unfilled because companies cannot find people that can pass their entrance exam. The United States military, 30% of high school graduates cannot pass the entrance exam to be a private in the Army. And they're failing it on the math and science portion. And this is the most basic level of math and science. But you think about the sophistication in our military today, not hard to understand how that can happen. We have got to raise this bar so that young people coming out of the secondary school system are prepared for whatever career they choose. Whatever career they choose. Now, you know, I'm a passionate engineer. I love engineering. And we're only graduating, 4% of the college graduates last year were engineers. And only 1.4% of those were women. We got to get more women into these areas of interest. We've got to get more represented groups from all groups interested in these areas, and you got to start at a very young age. So this is we got a pipeline problem that stretches all the way back into elementary school, through middle school, through high school. But some of us are not willing to abandon the kids that are trapped in the system now, and that's where the Common Core State Standard can help us get at that quickly. We can't wait and start at the front end and say, well, all of you kids that have got 12 years ahead of you, sorry, just deal with it. You know, you're doomed. No, we can't do that. We've got to get inside the system now, start working it, and we've got to deal with the fact that we got 3 million jobs we can't fill simply because people don't have the skills. And there are solutions to that as well. But we've got to get after it.
Yeah, that Army aptitude test is interesting, and with that too, you see variance from state to state. So in Hawaii, 38% of kids high school graduates who are trying to enlist fail that aptitude test. And in Indiana, it's more like 13%, even though Indiana has a higher child poverty rate. So that's a huge variance, 38% to 13%. So you see how, you know, a high school diploma means radically different things from school to school or state to state. And I assume from country to country, and we see some evidence for that in the data.
Well, I think, and just one last point, and because there's a lot of well-intended people out there doing a lot of things to try and improve this system. And unfortunately, a lot of the resources are well-intended but misdirected. One of the common I see across every community has high school graduation targets. Everybody wants to see the high school graduation rate go up. Well, that's admirable and laudable, but what you've really got is a diploma in good attendance. Now, that's not bad. I mean, it's good that they're in school because it means they're not doing a lot of things that are going to ruin the rest of their lives. But the point is, that's a nice goal to have. We can all hit it. We can all achieve it. And what have you got at the end of that? What kind of talent did you produce? So while I don't mean to sound critical of those programs, but there is so much capacity in our system that's being directed at the wrong problem.
I wonder if you can see, Jorge, I believe Canada is under your jurisdiction, right, at Accenture? Canada is a great example where you have 15% child poverty, which is pretty high. It's a federal system like ours, and you have pretty high immigrant intake in Canada as well. But Canadian 15-year-olds are performing at the top of the world on a test of critical thinking and math, very close to, right behind Japan. So that's a remarkable thing that is right next door to us. Can you ever see the differences in the candidates you're getting for jobs between Canada and the United States, or is that sort of a naive question?
No, to a degree. I think we do see it to a degree, right? I mean, clearly, but you know, we're competing globally for talent.
Yeah.
So whether it's Canada or South America or Europe or, you know, further east, I mean, I think we're going to go after the best people to fill the most critical jobs. And, you know, particularly in our business, that means we've got to, you know, go out to where the talent pools are. And I will tell you that there are many other countries, Canada included, that have figured that out. And they are producing much better capable talent that we are then going to hire.
So can you actually, I mean, with these aptitude tests or other metrics that you're using to look at candidates, can you actually see variance from country to country? I've asked executives this before, and the answer is always, well, it's complicated, you can't compare, so I forgive you if that's, what you're going to say.
It's complicated and you can't compare, but...
I just had to try, I just had
You'd like to protect all your employees. So.
Yeah, right. But it would be really valuable to see that variance from country to country if it's possible. Do you think, I mean, is one of the challenges here that we feel like in this country we have a pretty decent higher education system, right? So we can maybe make up for some of the weaknesses of our K through 12 system. Do you find that that's actually, Joe, is that how things actually work out on the ground? That, you know, since we do have a relatively well-respected higher education system, we are able to compensate for some of our weaknesses?
Well, first of all, I think it's an unfair advantage because, you know, you think of an Exxon or an Accenture, an EMC or Microsoft. We have the ability to get the talent. So I would bet you none of the CEOs fear what talent star. We can go get it.
Yeah.
But again, you know, you're talking about big corporations that have a lot of capability and have huge breadth, right, in terms of where we operate, in terms of how we operate. But you gotta bring that problem down, I think. And you're talking of a small or medium-sized business or that doesn't have those. I think they would probably feel it more. But I do think that, and I mentioned it before. I think the opportunity with us is to change the way we learn, which can help change the way we measure too. If you stay in a classroom today. I was talking to Governor Bush before. I mean, and you sit through a classroom, which I've done, and most of us have done. It's not tremendously different from when I was there. You know, as I said, you know, when I studied, I had to go home and open up my Encyclopedia Britannica, which they don't exist anymore. They go to the web, and you went to the library more often. But basically, it's the same. Where we have the opportunity, I think, if we embed more online learning, more e-learning, to do two tremendous things. You'll form, the students themselves can form community and help each other, I should say. And number two is you can constantly measure, you know, because if we get over some of the privacy, we can constantly measure, and the professor or the teacher would know exactly where that student is and what kind of help, what they're getting, what they're not getting, what kind of help they need. Because and the more points you measure, right? As long as you do it in a kind of sensible fashion, you're going to know a lot more about these students and how to help them. So I really think there's great hope in applying some of these new online learning, e-learning, community types of experiences that can really change the whole. I think bend the cost curve, which we need to do in this country. You can't always throw money at everything. And number two, I think you're going to get a better output per student.
Yeah, I think there's a potential for that, certainly. You know, the history of the United States with education technology is not one of unmitigated success. You know, we tend to invest in a lot of technology and not get returns, but there's certainly the potential for that. And I wonder, Fred, if we could talk a little bit about, you know, there was a story in the Washington Post today about how half of American public school kids, almost half, 48% I think it was, qualify for free or reduced price lunch. And this is something that comes up a lot when you talk about our economic competitiveness. As people say, well, look, our problem is clearly poverty, and that focusing, you can raise the standards, but when you have kids who are really struggling and families that are really struggling just to get by, that's not going to work. What do you say to that? How do we sort of work? Is poverty part of this conversation, and should it be more of a part of this conversation?
I mean, first of all, really tough question there, but
Yes, sorry.
no, it's good. But here's how I look at it, right? I'm just one that subscribes to. I don't like any excuses. I look at how can we get in the classroom? How do you capture whether they may be economically disadvantaged to being economically well off? I look at something that I do that I just started back doing. I started last year. I go in and mentor 20 African American young men at Whittier STEM School in Washington, D.C. And I just try to motivate them, to talk to them about what a career could be like at a Microsoft, or for that matter at an EMC, or that matter to be the next app developer of Angry Birds or whatever it may be, to get them engaged, to think about you, no matter what type of obstacles you may think that are out there, you can do what you want to do. You can dream big and you can do big, but here's what you got to do. You got to work hard. You got to study. You can't let anything get in the way. Teachers need to make sure that they teach and help to bring the best out of one. And there's a whole bunch of combination of factors that make that difference, so that you can make that environment one where you have a love, that I always try to motivate the kids, love to learn. Because if you can get them there, right, and there may be some other obstacles, it may make a difference. So when I think about, does poverty make a difference? It may. I don't know, I have enough science on that to be able to back up that aspect, but I think that if you can make that a sacred place, kind of like in the classroom, and make a difference, and someone can see that they can do, and you expose them to it, who knows on that aspect? Because I've seen so many people, when they put their mind to it, no matter what environment they're in, right? And say, hey, I'm going to go learn, and I'm going to go be the best that I'm going to be. And the teachers are going to hold them to that standard, and then help to inspire. I think that can make a difference.
Yeah, I will say, the data does suggest that poverty matters a lot in education outcomes, but this is the only country I've spent time in where we assume poverty and education are separate things, which is sort of interesting. I don't know why that would be, since we know that improving education helps reduce poverty.
Right.
But it does seem like we're kind of stuck on this mutually exclusive narrative, which is odd. One of the things that I learned from the teachers I met in Kentucky was that they spent, as one teacher told me, we wasted a lot of time worrying that our kids couldn't do this, that our kids couldn't do the Common Core state standards because they were harder. And she said, if I could go back, I would skip that step. Because it turns out our kids can do this.
That's exactly right.
And again, particularly in math, this is a big jump up from where we were. But one thing that I've seen is that there are countries that systematically overestimate what kids can do. And we are a country that seems to underestimate what kids can do, particularly in math and science. So there are other hopeful models out there, and I'm sure all of you have spent time in some of these countries like South Korea or Singapore, which also have their problems, right? Yeah. But I guess I wonder, I'm listening to you talk about how you don't want to abandon the kids who are stuck, right. and I'm listening to you talk about how many advantages you have as big companies and trying to recruit and hire. You don't actually need to hire Americans. I mean, you could actually get this done without a huge number of American employees. Is that right?
Well, and a lot of the talent that is enabling the success of the United States today is talent that was educated elsewhere. There was a recent article, because of course there had just been the Nobel prizes awarded here recently, and if you saw the article, it was describing the number of Nobel laureates per country, and clearly the United States has a significant number, larger than any other country, of Nobel laureates. If you look at those Nobel laureates that are living, and this was Nobel laureates that are living today, 25% of the US Nobel laureates were educated someplace other than the United States. Now that's a great testimony to the attractiveness of the United States for talent. People who are very talented want to come here because they see this as the place where they can succeed and realize the maximum value of the talent they have to offer in whatever field that may be. So we benefit enormously because we are America, and this is a place where talent naturally wants to come. I think, this whole question of the environment and the poverty question, what I would observe is I've tried to understand that, and I understand it mostly through other philanthropic work I do with underserved parts of the community. Boy Scouts is a big deal for me, and I work with a lot of underserved kids in the community, is that what's in that poverty environment that you're talking about are really two important elements in the education learning environment, is the quality of the teacher and the adult support they get back home. Now, and it doesn't have to be back home, but in so many situations, these are single parent kids, or they're no parent kids, they're grandmother raised kids, or there are two parents who are working two jobs, and so they're getting very little adult support back home for their learning process. And so what you have to have, so I think if there's a gap in there, it's not about the fact that they have to have subsidized meals or the fact that they live in a really crummy part of town. It's what kind of support are they getting from their adult role models and their mentors, and the teacher's the mentor, and the quality of the teacher, and then the quality of support they're getting away from the school. And that's why there are any number of organizations who stand in for mom and dad or grandma to help provide that. They just need that role model that is supportive of your point. These kids can learn. Anybody that says these kids can't learn is way underselling the kids in this country. They can learn. It's all about expectations, and it's all about delivery. But they've got to have that support at that critical stage of their life when there are so many ways they can get off track and go wrong. So if you translate that overseas, these are different social models when you go into other countries. They're very different social models for how countries deal with poverty or how they deal with underserved parts of their population. And I think it's very much a function of the culture of the country, very much a function of the fabric of what makes that culture what it is. But in this country, it's very much a function of we care about each other. And we put the adult leadership in there, and we put a quality teacher in there, and these kids, there's a kid out there that can't do anything that the kid next to him can do with the right system.
It's interesting. I haven't really thought about that. You're right. I think the U.S. doesn't have a very strong sort of welfare state, but it has a pretty strong community organization state compared to many countries around the world. I don't think they're equivalent, right? I mean, you can't just switch them in. But I do think that's an interesting way to try to make up for some of these gaps. And it's worth noting that there are countries with very strong welfare states and very low child poverty with very mediocre education outcomes.
Indeed.
Including, well, we don't have to name names, but we can talk later if you want. So, look, I think we have a little time. We have a couple questions I know that that a couple people have already said they wanted to ask, and I want to make sure we have a little bit of interaction. There's so many of you. I wish we could have more of a conversation, but we have to be a little bit limited here. So why don't we open it up? Is Mike Petrilli here? Yes, there we go.
All right, great. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for the great comments, for your leadership up here. Mike Petrilli from the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. I want to ask about high-achieving students. We have this problem, I would say, in America today, where there's a sense that if we do gifted and talented education, for example, that's elitist. Or at the high school level, we've had, in many ways, a positive push to get more kids into, say, AP classes. But at the same time, we haven't made sure that our highest achieving kids have a chance to fulfill their full potential. I'll give you one example. Los Angeles Times last week reported on a California school district that decided they're going to have open access to AP classes Understand the argument for that. But they didn't actually have enough teachers to teach those courses. So there's scarcity. So what do? They have a lottery to decide who can get into those courses. All right, so some kid who's an A student, working hard, wants to take AP, wants to go into STEM, can't get in. A peer that's a C student. You know, we would never field a varsity football team this way, right? But this is how we decide who gets into AP. So my question is, are we doing enough for our highest achieving students? What can we do to make sure that those are the students who are most likely maybe to go into some of these fields, to succeed, to go into your companies, and yet we're not paying much attention to them?
So I mean, I think technology is going to help with that in a major way, and let me explain how, right? Because I think the technological advances that I think Joe was referring to earlier, I think can be applied to how we teach, not just how we learn. And for the past couple of decades, it's been mostly about distributing content, right? But I think if we could start applying some of the analytics and social and mobility and those kinds of capabilities to how we actually apply the science of teaching, we will be able to get kids that can learn much faster and be high achievers and let them roam. And the kids that really need it, we'll figure out how we can actually direct activities to deal with them. I also feel that technology is going to allow the best capabilities of what people can teach to people who want it. I was in a panel earlier today where one of the students actually talked about being able to take any course from anywhere at any time, right? And I think the higher achieving students are going to figure out that the best classes are being taught by XYZ provider or this other particular school, and maybe even some other part of the world. And they're going to have access to that when they want it, how they want it. So I really believe that technology is going to be the enabler to really provide for both the top end, but also for the bottom, right? To be able to get that specialization that they really need.
Yeah, I think I think one of the issues that we struggle with in this country is the willingness to differentiate. The willingness to differentiate talent and skills. And the system you just described, I mean, we would never put a workforce together that way. I mean, we don't go to the engineering college at University X and say, all right, everybody put your name in a hat and we're going to pick out the 6 of you that get to go to work for us. Doesn't work that way. We are a meritocracy. We work on merit and we promote on merit. And for some reason, we're unwilling to take that same approach sometimes in the educational process. And what we're really doing is we're not only penalizing certain children, kids in the education system, but we're also not serving the one that won the lottery. Because the truth of the matter is, that young person's time is most likely better spent on a different education curriculum. And again, that's why I say if you go back to some of the models that other countries follow, they're very willing through very rigorous testing processes to differentiate the talent capability of young people and put them on a path to success that says when you finish your secondary education, you're on a pathway to a job. And it may be over here on a pathway that's a vocational type job, or it may be on a pathway that says you're going on to a university to become an engineer, an accountant, a finance person, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever. But at the end of it, they've got a talent of people coming out that are ready to go do something productive in society. And that's how that's how we're going to close the barbell gap we got in this country, is the people down here simply, we failed them. We didn't find what their highest and best use in our economy was and then equip them to go do it. We left them out there because we asked them to do some things that they were never going to do, instead of giving them the things they can do and cultivating that skill. That is a very difficult conversation to have in this country. It's very difficult. We are very reluctant as a society to differentiate people. And it's because I think people are reading into that things that don't exist.
It's interesting. This actually is a very, very mysterious and important topic that we obviously don't have a huge amount of time to get into. But internationally, the longer you wait to track kids, to separate them into vocational and academic tracks, the better everyone seems to do on tests of critical thinking and math, reading, and science. Yes. So that's counterintuitive in some ways, right? At the same time, the United States actually tracks earlier and more aggressively than most developed countries around the world. And it's not with AP classes, right? It's with gifted and talented when you're 6. It's with then honors classes, or it's with de facto tracking because we're going to schools that are pretty segregated by race and income. So on the one hand, I think you're right that we're underserving our top and our low and sometimes our middle performers. But at the same time, there is, I'm not sure that separating them, at least not at an early age, is the solution, right? So I obviously have more questions than answers on this, but I just wanted to...
Most of these separations occur at about the middle school level, about 8th grade.
Right.
Is where they begin to separate on a 2-track system.
Right.
And I think what happens is, you're right, we do a lot of measuring. And being the benevolent, caring people that we are, and Americans are just that way, we look at the kids that are not doing so well, and we say, well, we got to do something so they're doing as well as these kids are. When in fact, that may not be the right answer, to try and make them as good as these kids that are more talented intellectually for whatever reason. Rather, let's find out what is the right way to educate that child to a point that then we can get everybody to the point that we know, all right, this is where you're going to be most successful, this is where you're going to be most successful. Very hard conversation to have.
Yeah, it is, but it may be a question of when you do it. I'm pretty sure 6 isn't the right age.
I agree.
When Poland delayed it from age 15 to age 16, they saw big gains across all socioeconomic levels and performance levels.
Right.
So just 1 year there
Right.
was pretty
Right.
interesting. So, but yeah, sorry, I'm hijacking this conversation, but it's so interesting.
And you know more about it than any of us.
But I think we've got
So it's not a fair fight.
one more question in the audience here.
Thanks. My name's Dale Urquiaga. I'm the new state superintendent in Nevada. And since I work for a governor, for the gentleman in Texas, if you'd like to move to a state that is a Common Core state, I'd be glad to have you. Someone tell my boss that I did that, please. So I do work in a service-oriented economy, and so I want a little free business advice. I have to create a market among parents who can't help their children with Common Core homework. So I want some advice about how to turn my 25,000 licensed teachers into a sales force. You're all in sales and business. How do I get them to be my sales force?
Such a good question. Go.
Jorge. No, I don't know. But, you know, when you think of this, right, the concept is, you know, maybe we were very lucky, right? Because I can tell you right now, when I was growing up, I would much rather be playing baseball than doing my homework. But my mother found out that, you know, was on me, and I had to do both, right? I mean, I shouldn't say don't play baseball, do your homework, but and because she was a math teacher, you know, I got pretty good help. And even when I, by some fluke, took Latin, I said, now I got her, but then she reminded me she was a minor in Latin, so she helped me there too. So I was very lucky. But I do think there's, when you look at this homework that these kids now get, there are a lot of families out there that can't get that help I got. And that is a severe disadvantage, and I think that's the root of your point. And I really think, you know, and Rex said it too, there's a lot of people out there willing to help. And how do you gather a community, right? And I do think technology offers the opportunity, right, to form these communities. And technology offers you the distance. You don't have to be with the person, right? You know, if you look at young kids, they FaceTime more than they will give their peers a call. They don't email anymore. They're always instant messaging. So there's different ways of learning, a different way to form these communities. And I think using technology to form these communities, and there's a lot of willing people out there. Even 8th graders helping 4th graders, or high school helping the 8th graders. So I think forming these exchanges, these communities, is going to be a big part of the answer. And there's a lot of willing people out there willing to give.
I'm just going to bring up Kentucky one more time because I have like a quote I'm trying to hit.
You really like
on
Kentucky.
At least I haven't brought up Finland, not even once. I don't think I've brought up Finland. Thank you very much. So one of the things that I was really struck by is the parents that I talked to kept saying how they wanted to know that if they moved, which people do now, you know, their kid would basically be facing the same targets in a different states for what they were supposed to know. Because if you talk to military families, right, you know that, or other families who move a lot, that they struggle with this. You know, the kid will move from Maryland to to Nevada and have totally different sort of standing in his or her class. So that's one thing they want to know. They also want to know that wherever their child goes to college, they will be more or less prepared, right? I mean, parents really want that. Parents don't want to waste their money on college any more than they already are doing. So I feel like you're right to think of that. And one of the things that probably your best sales force are your teachers, right? Who, if you can get their buy-in, right? They're very credible in talking about this to parents. So I think we're just about out of time here. We've got 46 seconds, so I'm gonna hit this target. Are you ready? So I want to say, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here. The work that you do touches so many American kids, right? With the products that you create. But most of them cannot visualize what your lives are like or why the work that they're doing in school will make their life more interesting. So everything that you do to try to help kids connect the dots and try to help all of us help kids connect the dots is incredibly valuable, and I hope will pay dividends for many years to come. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.